Synergy session, sponsored by the Future Skills Center. Immigration and Employment, Barriers, Bridges, and Benefits. I'm Rob Greenwood, Director of the Harris Center and Associate Vice President of Public Engagement and External Relations at Memorial University. Today I'm in St. John's, Newfoundland. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups. And we acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. We encourage everyone to reflect on these lands from where you are located this morning, and to consider the Indigenous peoples for whom these lands are traditional territory. We know that immigrants bring not only skills and experience to their new workplace, but also new ideas and new opportunities for both their place of employment and their community. However, newcomers still face a multitude of barriers to finding suitable employment in Canada, all while many employers across Canada are facing a labor shortage. Our session today asks, how can governments, business, and society bridge the gap for both employers and immigrants? We are joined today by 4 panelists with a wealth of knowledge on this topic. After hearing from our panelists, we have set aside the second half of the session for your questions, so get ready. Feel free to post them in the Q&A box at any point during the session, and we will read them out if we get a chance, and we'll bundle questions where we can and make the most of our time together. We are recording today's session, which will be posted online afterwards at mun.ca/Harris Center, or you can just Google the Harris Center website. Now, let's meet our panelists. We are very happy to welcome Alexandra Stefanovich. Alexandra is an independent consultant and director of Lenica Consulting. She has worked in the area of employment and immigration for over 15 years, developing targeted online training programs and conducting research to better support program development. She is also pursuing her PhD in community health and humanities at Memorial University, looking at employment and disability. Alexandra teamed up with Access Career Services on their latest Networks initiative to support newcomer professionals and local employers as they navigate the post-pandemic labor market landscape. Alexandra is joined by her colleague, Sherry Abbott. Sherry is the Employment Development Manager, Career Practitioner with the Access Career Services Division of the Association for New Canadians. Her responsibilities include delivering a broad array of programs and services, including facilitating pre-employment skills development workshops for internationally trained workers, refugees, and immigrant youth. Sherry's commitment to progressive career services practices, together with her strong knowledge of immigration policy and procedures, empowers and motivates newcomers towards successful integration into the workforce and into the community. We are also joined by Dr. Tony Fang here at Memorial University. Tony is the Stephen Yarosowski Chair in Economic and Cultural Transformation at Memorial. He currently holds the J. Robert Baster Faculty Fellowship at Rutgers University and sits on the World Bank's Expert Advisory Committee on Migration and Development. He has published widely in the areas of immigration, equity, diversity, pension, retirement policy, and aging workforce, minimum wages and youth employment, and union impact on wages, innovation, and firm growth. Welcome, Tony. And we can't forget our former Harris Center Associate Director, Mike Clare. Mike is a former senior official in the government of Newfoundland and Labrador and at Memorial University. He is now in semi-retirement, although based on his schedule, I'd say it's less semi than he'd probably like, doing consulting work in regional development, public policy and governance, and dealing with such issues as immigration, innovation, governance, and public health. He currently sits on 6 not-for-profit boards and is writing a book on innovation in regional development. So we have quite a powerhouse of people there for our panel. Thank you all for joining us. And we're going to start off with questions for the panel, just to get you outlining your thoughts on the topic, and we'll get into the Q&A as soon as possible. Mike, I'll start with you because you worked with me for many years and I like to pick on you. I know this is an area of interest for you for a long time, both through your work with us at the Harris Center and also as a volunteer. The report you wrote on immigration here in Newfoundland and Labrador really gave people a comprehensive guide to not only how the immigration system works, but where it falls short, especially if we view increased immigration as a key in tackling the demographic situation facing many rural areas, certainly in Newfoundland and Labrador, but also across Canada and elsewhere. What do you see as the challenges that we face as jurisdictions that want to encourage immigration?
Well, thank you very much, Rob. Thank you for the invitation to participate today and for your question, and greetings to my fellow panelists as well. I want to say, first of all, that I'm tremendously impressed with what the government of Newfoundland and Labrador is doing these days. They are taking a very activist approach to immigration after years, if not decades, of relative inaction. So I'm delighted with the flurry of announcements over the past year and over the past several months that demonstrate their commitment to immigration. And I'm also impressed with the content of the announcements. Everything I've seen and heard point to a clear understanding of the issues and a sincere desire to address those issues. So I just want to start out by thanking the government of Newfoundland and Labrador for this change that they've taken over the last year or so. To address your question, I don't have a great deal of detailed knowledge about other Canadian provinces or European countries, etc. But I do know a fair bit about Newfoundland and Labrador. So I'm going to focus on that to answer your question. And I'll start out by saying that despite government's demonstrated interest in immigration, we're starting from a very low position. So there remains a lot to do. So Newfoundland and Labrador, so for those who don't know, it's one of the 10 provinces of Canada. We're the easternmost province. We're an island and a northern territory. We have the lowest percentage of immigrants of any of the 10 provinces. So only 2.4% of our residents are immigrants, compared to 22% nationally and 29% in the most populous province, Ontario. So in other words, we are per capita about a tenth of where the country is and our most populous provinces. Over the past several decades, we've attracted on average only 0.5% of all immigrants who came to Canada every year. So let me just repeat that. Out of the 400,000 immigrants that Canada attracts every year, we've only managed to attract about 2,000 of them. So 0.5% of all the immigrants. And of those, 3/4 have settled in the capital area, the St. John's area, the Northeast Avalon. And even at the peak of the resource boom from around 2004 to 2015, when we needed foreign workers to build our offshore oil, mining, and hydroelectricity mega projects, we focused on temporary workers instead of on immigrants. So we brought all these people in and made very little attempt to retain them afterwards, because the feeling was, well, they're only coming here to work for those projects, they'll be leaving afterwards. Why should we spend all that effort to try to retain them? So that has been the recent history of immigration in this province. So what does this all mean? Well, first, it means that as an economy, we don't know how to, and I'll use quotation marks, we don't know how to do immigration. We haven't built up the expertise or the social structures that other provinces and other countries have developed to recruit, settle, and integrate immigrants. So we just don't do that very well. Immigration is a complex and complicated field. And despite the federal government's many successful attempts to streamline the immigration process, because it's the federal government in Canada that determines who is allowed in the country and for how long, et cetera. Even despite their many successful attempts to streamline the immigration process, it remains complex and complicated, not to mention unforgiving. There was an example just last week of an English-speaking immigrant from the Middle East, or a would-be immigrant from the Middle East, whose immigration application was rejected because he'd mistakenly clicked that he was applying as a francophone instead of as an anglophone. It was a little mistake, a little clerical mistake on his part. He clicked the wrong radio button on the application, but then it was deemed by the federal government that he wasn't francophone enough to be accepted. So just because of that little mistake, his application went to the bottom of the pile. So it's an unforgiving process. Most employers in this province run small and medium-sized businesses that don't have a large or any human resources division, and as such are totally unaware of how to recruit people from outside the country or of the time it takes to actually have somebody physically show up at their door ready to work. A lot of people think it's a matter of weeks, when actually it's a matter of months, and in some cases a year or a little bit more. So the expectations of employers are out of line with what is in reality. I suspect that the only employers who are managing adequately are the very large employers, many of whom are publicly funded, such as Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador, the regional healthcare authorities, the utilities, or the larger municipalities. Pretty well everybody else is struggling with how to, quote, do immigration. We don't have enough certified immigration consultants to guide smaller employers, and the main expertise lies with the Association for New Canadians and with some sectoral associations, like those that deal with information technology or advanced technologies. It will take several years before we have enough people with the knowledge, skill, and experience to meet the demands of business. The other challenge we have is in settling and integrating immigrants. Most human migration in the early 21st century is from the Southern Hemisphere to the Northern one. That is, immigrants today are likely to have grown up in societies and cultures very different from Canada's. So while Newfoundlanders and Labradorians are renowned for their hospitality, this doesn't necessarily mean that we understand the needs of newcomers in things as simple as food, grooming products, clothing, and a host of other areas. There may be barriers such as language and having one's academic credentials and work experience recognized within a Canadian context. And I'm sure that my colleague panelists will have more to say on this one. And the last barrier that I'll mention is that while Canada is one of the most desired destinations for immigrants in the world, we rank in the top 3. It's US, UK, or Australia, and us. For most immigrants in the world, Canada consists of Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, or Calgary. Newfoundland and Labrador is not on most people's radars when they're considering moving to Canada. This means that it's not as simple as opening the door to the province and waiting for the hordes of immigrants to apply for entry. We're going to have to be very judicious in how we invest our recruitment efforts and resources. And part of the problem we have is that the pool of immigrants already in the province is small. As I mentioned earlier, only 2.4% of our population is composed of immigrants. So generally speaking, immigrants already in a country are an important source of other immigrants. They invite their family and friends to join them, and we lack that advantage. So the province is going to need to work twice as hard to attract newcomers than would any other province. So in my conclusions to the original questions, Rob, Canada's made it easier for immigrants to enter parts of the country that have low immigration levels. The Atlantic Immigration Pilot Program is one such example. The danger is that immigrants will use these programs to enter the country and then seek to move to Toronto or some other major center after a short period. So there's the danger there. But on the plus side, it does give the host region time to settle newcomers and convince them to stay long-term. And so in summary, the province is slowly but surely becoming more aware of the need for immigration and is developing the capacity to recruit, settle, and integrate newcomers. But there is still much to do before we can claim to be a truly immigrant-friendly destination.
Super. Thank you, Mike. We'll move to Tony next. And Tony, obviously, you've been studying for years now this topic. And most recently, your research has looked at some of the specific barriers to employment faced by newcomers, especially when it comes to employer attitudes towards hiring immigrants and international students. Can you tell us a little bit about that research and what you discovered?
First of all, thanks, Rob, and the Harris Center for organizing this important panel discussion. I think it's very timely and relevant. I think it's immigration, as Mike suggested, probably more important than ever for the province, also for Canada. And there are two important issues in this area. Of course, one is attraction. The number of immigrants we like to attract to the province, because we have very low percentage, right? Less than 2% versus 20% for Canada as a whole. And there's not room to grow. A second is retention, right? We have to make sure that immigrants actually are settling well and integrating well in our economy and society, to stay in the province and make contribution to the provincial economy for the long run. So the first part I think is very important is that there's lack of what we call critical mass for the province, right? And therefore there's lack of visibility of immigrants and lack of exposure for local residents and also employers. Okay, so the studies consistently found that in the region that have higher concentration of immigrants, and local residents and organizations are more supportive and more welcoming to newcomers, in part because we know how to deal with, how to work with newcomers, right? In the rural areas, Newfoundland and Labrador, based on the recent consultation with ANC about immigration needs of newcomers and international students, many of the local residents have never traveled outside the province. They have not been able to see, immigrants in a lifetime. So, that's part of the reason why we have issues and challenges about how to best integrate to settle immigrants in this province. And as a result, the retention rate, as Mike mentioned, that's probably relatively low, and 50%. We lost about 50% in 5-year time after the arrival of immigrants. So, we have done a number of studies, to help this what we call evidence-based decision-making process. I think it's very important for public policy making in this province, but also in Canada as a whole. For example, we have done this, representative survey of 800 employers across Atlantic Canada about employer hiring attitudes towards immigrants. And it's a longitudinal survey. We actually are going to do a second survey. This first survey was conducted in 2019, and before the pandemic. We are going to put a follow-up survey actually later this month to look at whether employee attitudes have shifted, after the pandemic. And even before the pandemic, according to the survey, more than 43% of employers in this province reported skilled labor shortages. As you know, the situation is even worse now after the pandemic, because we have not been able to attract, the immigrants and temporary foreign workers, international students, because of travel restrictions. Also because government have introduced a number of very generous COVID benefit program, which reduce the incentive of local workers to take, some job in fast food, in agriculture, fishery, and so on. So there are two areas of labor skill shortage in this province. One is a lower end skill distribution, as I just mentioned, those industries, frontline workers. The other is high skilled categories like doctors, nurses. We are almost at a crisis moment because of COVID. And also we have, shortage of, skilled trade workers, IT professionals, and so on, to develop this, new economy, right, for the future prosperity of the province. So the important challenge here is that how to ensure the employers have necessary tools, right, to help assist, immigrants and international to succeed in this province. As Mike mentioned that, the backbone of the economy are supported by small SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises. Many of them don't have even HR department. Based on that survey, large percentage, 60% of the employers don't have much knowledge about the immigration program and how they can assist. On top of that, because the cost involved immigration process and time required complete process, many employers, especially SMEs, very hesitant in hiring retaining. And then the other dilemma here is that because low retention rate, this is catch-22, right? And many employers say, we are concerned whether the immigrants will stay in the long run, so we're not going to hire them. Because they're going to hire them, the immigrants couldn't find a job. They say, if I couldn't find a job, of course I'm going to leave. And the study found that, meaningful employment is the number one reason that immigrants actually leave a particular province. This is the key challenge. This is also confirmed, by our recent consultation across the province with ANC. Number one barriers for immigrant retention is meaningful employment that match the skills and education. Is big challenge here. So that's the reason why I'm promoting right now with other organizations. This is called project-based immigration and community-based immigration, right? The idea is that immigrants bring their skills, but also their financial capital potentially through entrepreneurship program in agriculture, in mining, in fishery, and so on. So the community that settle them can see immediate benefits to job creation, to local economy, right? So I think it is key to build this kind of win-win situation for organizations, for the immigrant themselves, and also for the government. And so as a result, I can list a number of potential socioeconomic benefits of immigration to this province. Number one, I just mentioned, reduce the skill bottleneck, fill the skill labor shortages. Immigrants can do that. Second is that, through entrepreneurship, also consumption, immigrants actually can create jobs in both public and private sector. Contrary to those kind of misperception, immigrants take job away. There's no evidence whatsoever based on studies. Actually, if anything, immigrants can create job, actually high quality job, like doctors, professors, and lawyers, because they need immigrants as their potential customers, as I can tell very well in my graduate class. 80% of my students are international. 43%, I think over 40% of international graduate students at Memorial are international students. So immigrants can potentially help also facilitate a number of important areas. For example, how to keep rural, Mike mentioned that, schools and organization, business to survive in the long run. We need economy scale. How to stimulate international trade, because international students and migrants have those kind of international network to help building those kind of connections. We also need, immigrants to create more diverse culture to make Newfoundland and Labrador a more interesting place and culturally rich place to live. And so I can see this on and on, but we really take is that more concerted efforts, right? To actually introduce more. This is called social innovation. When we talk about innovation, it's not just about product innovation, process innovation, also social innovation, especially in policy area, right? We can learn best practice from other provinces and other countries that are successfully attracting and retaining immigrants. For example, we have a PMP program in Manitoba. It's very successful. They are very flexible in terms of how to give credits to international students for their co-op internship programs, and they can also defer the language requirement for entrepreneurship program in Saskatchewan. And it becomes a competition in this country. PEI, for example, Nova Scotia have been very aggressive in attracting newcomers to their province, and so there's a lot for us to do. Especially, I'm really going with this kind of concerted efforts. This is the only way, without community buy-in, this won't be successful. So we have to work with government, employers, and immigrant communities to make immigration a top priority for this province, a great success story that we can tell for our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Lots to chew on there and very poignant. I see lots of comments and questions showing up in the chat, so please keep those coming, folks. Before we get to the Q&A, though, some more from our panel. Sherry, I'm sure you see a lot of what Mike and Tony have spoken about playing out firsthand in your work. and you're the lead for an interesting program designed to help address some of those issues. Can you tell us a little about Access and what you do?
Sure will. Thank you, Rob, and thank you, everyone. Access Career Services is the employment division of the Association for New Canadians. For those of you that know the ANC, they've been active in our community here in Newfoundland and Labrador for more than 40 years. And since 1995, Access has been engaging newcomers in supportive and flexible learning opportunities that are designed to develop power skills, broaden their skill sets, and build resilience to prepare for working in the Newfoundland and Labrador workforce. We assist approximately 750 newcomers each year, and just most recently in 2020, 61% of those newcomers were educated in engineering, business, science, and technology. And in addition to assisting newcomers, we also support employers to nurture the spectrum of talent that newcomers can bring to the local labor market. And we've partnered with a network of more than 700 employers of all sizes throughout the province in order to bridge those employment gaps and match qualified newcomers with meaningful employment opportunities in the province. Our service delivery model really focuses on four main pillars: pre-employment and customized communications training programs, bridge to work programs such as internships, work placements, mentorships, industry engagement, of course, helping to match, skills matching, onboarding, and that all-important job maintenance piece and career advancement piece. That's one of the issues that employers often need, is that support to help with the onboarding and then also to help their employees advance in their workplace. And a key component is our collaborative partnerships and programs. I heard a comment on a call earlier this week that it takes a village. And in this case, it really does take a village of partners and stakeholders and employers and post-secondary, you name it, to help with the integration piece. So just to share another couple of statistics with you, so far this year, from January to August in 2021, we're recording a 53% increase in employment outcomes as compared to 2020. And we're also seeing a significant increase in the number of requests for assistance from employers. And that's at all levels. They're looking for those workers in essential services, but they're also looking for more professional jobs in engineering, technology, and business. And that's a very positive and hopeful sign for us, that as we move into the last quarter of this year and we start to think about the post-pandemic labor force, we're on the right track, and we hope that some things are really moving forward. And as Mike said much earlier, the announcements from provincial government and their support of new programs in these days, that's all really encouraging as well. So from our perspective, that's where we are. We're here to help as much as we possibly can. And I look forward to seeing where things go from here.
Great. Thank you, Sherry. And Alexandra, you've been working with Sherry on a new project funded by Future Skills Canada to expand some of the work of Access. Can you tell us what that project looks like?
With pleasure. Thank you for having us and for this opportunity to talk a little bit about employment and immigration. Everything that we're doing now is really to somehow minimize the impacts of COVID-19 and this disruption that occurred in the last almost 2 years now. I just want to bring us back a little bit to the time. This is just a personal note to another disruption. I arrived to Newfoundland and Labrador in 1996 as an immigrant. And the province was at that time still feeling the aftershocks of a different disruption, a different crisis, economic and ecological, which was the COG moratorium that was imposed by the federal government at the time. And you can imagine, for immigrants arriving to the province during or just after this big crisis, it's a major industry layoff that occurred in Canada. It was not easy. I'll just tell you that there was, when I arrived with 12 individuals and families. And within a year, I was the only one who stayed here. So that says a little bit about the retention rate then. I did look at some of the Mike's work, and it does seem that retention actually is even worse at this time, which to me is a little bit shocking. So what do we do? How do we address generally barriers and challenges and issues, and how do we address them now, a year and a half after COVID affected everybody? So in May last year, the Future Skills Center put out a call for proposals across the country. It was the Shockproofing the Future of Work Skills Innovation Challenge. And the Future Skills Center was looking for innovative ideas for research, networks development, or innovation pilot projects. They had the vision how to address the needs and the challenges of different population groups, especially vulnerable groups, in terms of skills development and training that's needed to build capacity and build resiliency. And what Access recognized, and having witnessed and experienced firsthand the challenges for newcomer professionals during COVID in terms of isolation, closures, layoffs, Access saw the opportunity to start developing networks, knowledge networks or resource networks. We really didn't at the time knew exactly where this was going, but we knew that connectivity and connection was key to overcoming this type of pandemic. And this was coming from the experience of working with newcomers and employers, as Sherry mentioned, during the pandemic. So we submitted a proposal to the Future Skills Center, and we were successful in securing the funding for 2 years to develop a networks-based structure, Newcomer Employment Resilience Network, Newfoundland and Labrador. So what is this network? The network really is focused on bringing key stakeholders together. So we're looking at professional organizations, local businesses, training providers, regulatory bodies, everybody who's involved within this labor market ecosystem, to share best practices, share knowledge, identify needs and skills and training that's necessary for people to get jobs, stay in those jobs, and really to thrive in those jobs. And all that time, supporting the businesses and helping the businesses grow. So the network is not as much, there's not as much demand from the network membership as such, other than knowledge mobilization. Newcomers are, of course, part of the network's development, but what we're looking at is really focusing on the skills and transitions of newcomers into the labor market, with all the programs and services and resources that already exist at Access. So the idea was not to reinvent the wheel in a sense of programming or services, because so much already exists and is developed. It's really redirecting it in a way that we can collectively organize ourselves and help each other to build this capacity to overcome any potential shocks, such as pandemic. So we're focusing on 3 particular sectors in these networks: the IT sector, finance sector, and resource sector. IT sector, I think, for obvious reasons, at least for those who live in our province, because the IT sector is booming, and it was a different kind of shock during the pandemic. I think they certainly just needed a lot more talent and skilled people to employ. Resource sector, because there's a lot of international students who are coming to Memorial to attend programs related to oil and gas industry. And then there's the finance sector. There's a lot of newcomers who have skills and credentials in the finance sector. This includes accounting and banking. We are looking even at research and development, any type of business. But they're generally, they belong to non-regulated, this is a non-regulated profession, and those often have a harder time, I guess, clarifying, their credentials and really finding that job that they trained for. Sometimes it's simply because employers cannot find the equivalent in the Canadian Canadian standards. So we're looking at non-regulated professions. We're also looking at regulated professions, 3 particular sectors, and we're looking at mobilizing partners in the province. So this is the idea of the networks. Our first task was to conduct a needs assessment. I'm not going to go into this too much, other than to say that we did find out that the partnerships and networks did increase everywhere in the world as a result of the pandemic, and that it seems that any type of knowledge network or a resource network is actually key to building that capacity and resiliency. When we talk about resilience, that's the key. We're focusing on small and medium businesses.
Alexandra, you're freezing up a little bit. I don't know if that's you or me, but maybe just clue up your last comment there.
Okay, so we have already started to hold meetings. We had our first roundtable for the core membership, and we're going to continue now to organize other sub-network meetings as we go along. If anybody's interested in finding out more and joining our networks, please contact us at any time.
Super, thanks for that. And hopefully the technology continues to cooperate for us here. I want to go to short snappers for a final comment from all of you, but really want to get to the Q&A too. Mike, if there was an essential policy level change that you would recommend to make connecting immigrants and employers more efficient, we're receiving some really interesting comments in the chat. What would one policy level change be that you would suggest for making that connection?
About a decade ago, there was a committee organized by the provincial government called the Strategic Partnership, which brought together labor, employers, government. And its main task was to look at the labor market, how it worked, what kind of jobs we need in the future, what kind of job openings there would be in the future, what kind of skills we would need in the future. And for a reason which is to me unfathomable, that committee was dissolved a while ago. It needs to be brought back. There needs to be a high-level committee that looks at labor market issues, including the barriers to employment to anybody, be they immigrants, be they women, be they persons with disabilities, whatever. We need a high-level committee that can learn how the labor market works, what the needs are, et cetera, and can communicate those needs to the province as a whole so that the rest of us can make appropriate decisions regarding hiring, retention, education, et cetera, et cetera.
Thanks, Mike. Tony, again, short snappers, one key policy change you would recommend?
Yeah, I would say a couple. One is provide necessary support and information to employers, immigration information, especially to small, medium-sized enterprise, because they don't have this HR capacity. Second is that reduce all kind of red tape and regulation, unnecessary regulation. For example, someone made comments also in the chat box. For example, if you newcomer want to start business, you need to get a partner, a local partner who has 50% plus one, so which is very challenging. The second is that, for someone coming from, other countries, if you want to get a license, or drive license, or even get insurance, that could be thousands of dollars, right? So those kind of regulations and, red tapes need to be sufficiently reduced by learning from other provinces, right? How to make our programs more flexible, right? More accommodating to newcomers' need. I think that's crucial.
Thanks, Tony. Sherry, any quick comment on policy change that you think could make a difference?
I think for me, the key is collaboration. We're seeing some of that because of COVID. I think it's only going to grow, and I really think it'll be the future of the success here in the province.
Alexandra, anything different to add?
No, I think sometimes the policies, it's hard for policies to surmount things like networking, for example, which I think is really important for newcomers when they arrive to new communities. So that it comes down to partnerships, collaboration. That's the key to everything.
Great, thank you. I see lots of really interesting comments and some questions in the chat, as well as a couple of questions now in the Q&A. Kathy Newhook, I think you're going to cull from what has been submitted so far. Do you have a question or a cluster of questions that can be grouped together?
Sure. I've got the first question here. Someone's wondering, is there a channel to provide feedback and suggestions to the Provincial Immigration Office? I believe temporary residents, such as international students, could provide useful comments as they find barriers when looking for PR pathways. I believe active communication with newcomers to be the first step in trying to address retention rates.
Mike, want to jump in there?
Just an interesting comment, Rob. Something that I learned when I wrote my report is that at the federal level, people are calling their MPs all the time about immigration issues, about whether it's a relative who can't get in or a general policy question. Nobody's calling the provincial MHAs about immigration issues. So one way to get to the immigration office, call your MHA, but also there's some great people working in that office. You can give them a call, but remember that they don't have policy powers, right? The people with policy powers are the ministers, etc. So call your MHA.
Thanks, Mike. Others want to jump in on that one? Sherry?
I would have to agree with Mike. The Office of Immigration and Multiculturalism here is very open. They're very open to feedback. I'm not sure if they have a direct channel right now, but I mean, we're certainly happy to pass on some feedback. We're certainly happy to follow up with them after this session and see if there might be an option to provide some additional feedback for them.
Super. Alexandra, anything different there to add?
No.
No. Tony?
Yeah, I would suggest that policymakers like us, don't just sit in office, right? Make all our judgment. Talk with the immigrants, the international students and refugees. That's the reason why we do this cross-province consultation. We heard a lot of top issues and challenges, but just give you one, right? Temporary foreign workers, 90% of them would like to stay in the province, but there's no clear pathway for them to make transition from temporary resident to permanent residence. Many of the spouses, or the children's visa will be rejected. And also they would like to take tests, but a lot of time there's long line for them to take tests. They have to, take tests in St. John's, right? And they cannot take time, away from the job. So there's huge challenge, for the government to deal with. So what I said is that, policymakers and academics need to listen to the immigrants, international students, to understand the concerns and to find solutions for those problems.
Thanks, Tony. And I see more questions as well as in the chat box. Kathy, and I do have another question or two if need be, but Kathy, others you want to pose there?
Yeah, we've got lots of questions coming in. Memorial and other institutions have dozens of qualified workers graduating every year, and yet there remain shortages in these areas like engineering and nursing. These individuals often end up leaving the province to find work elsewhere, or for international students, returning to their home countries. Why do you think this disconnect exists? And that question's come up a little bit in the chat too, just referring to the opportunities for immigrants to find work in a province that does struggle with unemployment. So kind of making sure that connection or how that disconnect can be rectified.
And this is an issue for rural areas in general. And of course, Newfoundland and Labrador has a lot of rural areas, although the St. John's region is like many metro regions across the country. Tony, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, it's, as I mentioned that this is a high, level of the skill distribution, right? We need a lot of doctors, nurses, critical shortage, especially after pandemic. And he said, I think we need, as a group, come up with some solution, for example, provide some incentives, right? One is that maybe some tax break, or some training opportunities, some practice opportunities, and other being, other kind of spouse employment and so on and so forth. So, basically we need come up with critical solutions, right? Because, there's, skill shortages everywhere for doctors and nurses, right? I was, a while back in the emergency room in the hospital, I waited for 10 hours, right? Just get first contact with the doctor. So it's a huge issue in the province.
Sherry or Alexandra, thoughts on this one?
Yes, it's a very complicated issue. Why can't we keep those educated in the province? I think looking for a job for anyone is difficult. There are so many steps, and one of them for locals, of course, who are graduating, there's a history, there are connections, there is, the level of comfort and knowledge to go where they need to go. So for immigrants, this is much more complicated and much more difficult. I think they always feel like going somewhere where their community, their ethnic group and community is bigger is going to be easier. There's going to be more help and support. And this is especially for women. I mean, research always points out to this. So another thing is families. Even if there is a job for me as a doctor, maybe my family isn't going to find that as, I don't know, maybe my wife needs a job, or, the children are not happy. So there's a lot of work that has to be done to connect those two dots and then provide support for the families as well. I think, again, networking, reaching out, connecting people to the right organizations, the right supports is the key.
Sherry, anything different to that?
Just to add on to that, I guess that is something we've been working on a little bit in rural Newfoundland and Labrador with our satellite offices in 7 different regions, and having somebody on the ground to liaise with us here back, at the home front, but also out there on the ground to work with those employers and newcomers in those areas, particularly the families, and helping with that settlement piece. So I think there's some good work being done. We're getting there, and we'll keep on going.
And Mike, I know this is an area central to your concerns. Any different thoughts or suggestions?
To my mind, Rob, this is the most important question facing the province, its labor markets right now. So in one ear, I'm hearing employers saying, well, I can't get qualified workers. On the other ear, I'm listening to graduated students, be they international students or domestic students, saying, well, I can't get a job. No jobs here. I got to leave. What is wrong here? It's a basic problem. Now, I noticed that the province is putting together some kind of a matching system for international students, which is great. Well, let's hope that it works and that the system works and more students connect. We need the same thing for our domestic students as well as everybody else. But we also need that top level labor market committee that would look at problems like this and hire somebody like Tony to do a study specifically on how come qualified people can't get jobs in this province. It's illogical.
And I'm sure Tony is nodding agreement to that. Kathy, other questions, comments from our audience?
Yes, so a couple of kind of specific questions. Is there a way that those whose work requires licensing, like doctors and nurses, could be incorporated into the immigration policy to make it flexible so that they can easily come to Newfoundland and Labrador?
Anyone with knowledge on that one? Maybe put up your hand. Tony, fire away.
Yeah, so this is all, we talk about doctor, nurses, the issues, a lot of them have high qualifications, from India, China, sometimes even United States. They cannot practice immediately in Canada and Newfoundland and Labrador because regulation, right? That's what I said earlier. A lot of red tape, a lot of regulation, even, doctor trained in in US, you would say would be equivalent, right, to those in training in Canada, but still they have to go through all this, a complicated process of testing, licensing, right? Time consuming and also expensive. So I think, again, going back to the basics, the government should be creative, right? Work with feds and to be, more flexible, accommodating, reduce the cost and time required for the immigration process.
Right on. Mike, on that one.
Just to add to what Tony's saying, this is probably one of the easiest immigration things because there are pathways. So if a doctor from the Philippines wants to move to Newfoundland and Labrador and practice medicine, there are ways of evaluating. There's systems in place to evaluate the credits and everything else. And if that person doesn't meet all the requirements, there are pathways for them to get the requirements or to become a licensed practical nurse instead of a doctor. So that part of it is good. But there's lots. So the regulated professions, in a kind of a way, they're more onerous, but I want the person who operates on my heart to meet all the requirements of a Canadian standard, right? So yeah, it might take time, but let's go through it. But there's lots of other trades, occupations, etc., that don't have those same pathways, and that's where it becomes a bit more difficult.
Thanks, Mike. Sherry or Alexandra, something else to add on this one?
I think I would agree with Mike. We certainly need to, it's very important that these pathways are in place, and it's very important that someone goes through these proper pathways. And outside of those regulated professions, I think that's what we're really trying to address with this new project, is to sort of bridge those gaps and try to make things a little easier. But we also want to start looking at those alternative careers and those related jobs that would help someone who's working towards that pathway, but also helping them to gain that experience and move towards working in that dream job that they have. In terms of the immigration piece, I'm not sure we could do much to change the policy around those types of things, but I mean, we are here to try and support and help and navigate through those processes.
And I'm just going to add that I think time and timing is really important when it comes to helping immigrant employment. Keeping people motivated to pursue what they've trained for is important, which means, really making things quick and relatively easy. And I think that once the motivation is gone, as Sherry mentioned, there are alternatives and that still can be here in our province. We can offer those too. But it would be great just to see the experience and knowledge and credentials utilized.
Right on. Kathy, what else do you have there from our audience?
I just wanted to point out quickly before we go to the next question, there's a comment in the chat there from people who work with Global Canada, have some programs that they're starting with nurses. So if anyone's looking for more information about that, I'm sure they can find that online or reach out in the chat there to continue on the discussion about addressing that particular issue. I think this makes for a good final question, potentially, looking at the time. Are the various costs we're talking about, such as a lack of retention, happening because of institutionalized racism and sexism? So that's a big one. Tony, I know you've worked a fair bit on the attitudes of employers when it comes to hiring. So how much of the retention issue related to immigration can be kind of stemmed back to racism and or sexism?
Yeah, there is.
Yep. Go ahead, Tony. Sorry.
There is evidence from our consultation across the province, in terms of biases, prejudice, discrimination, and local preferences, especially in hiring and also in layoffs and our allocation, right? That's clearly the case. We find it usually is more prevalent in urban centers like St. John's or Corner Brook, but less so. It's kind of interesting. That's so maybe because the culture is different. In smaller Clarenville, those play different smaller towns and cities. So yeah, this is certainly something that need to be addressed. I heard a lot of frustration because of that, right? If even, for example, during the pandemic, right? There are a lot of layoffs, but usually newcomers will be the first let go, even they have regardless of performance or qualification. So yeah, this is, becomes something I think we all are aware of, right? This kind of issue. But it takes concerted efforts. Again, the government should put in more, strict measures, to prevent this from occurring. And also organizations should actually, introduce more cross-cultural training, cross-cultural communication, and academics should actually present more concrete evidence to demonstrate the value of newcomer international students, how to, elevate labor skill shortages, how to make a positive contribution to the economy, and how to make this place more interesting place to live and work. And so this is again. So I think it's important areas and a critical concern in terms of long-term, integration, retention of immigrants. Usually, I also done this longitudinal study of Syrian refugees in the different cohorts, right? Compared with other cohort refugees, the new cohort usually are more, satisfied, and maybe because of the honeymoon effects, right? This is a new place, this is a very friendly place. But the old cohort usually have more complaints about this, the bias and prejudice. And this is, really, I think, something that is about exposure, right? Visibility. We understand the root cause. The reason why we do this kind of qualitative research, interview, focus group, consultation, we don't want only know from statistics, right? This is an issue. We know the incidents, right, from macro data. But what is more important, understand the deep root causes, okay, and including cultural factors, right, so that we can find meaningful, solutions, measures to remove such biases, prejudice, and discrimination.
Thanks, Tony. Sherry or Alexandra, any thought on this question fairly quickly? We're getting near the end here.
I know we have a very active team here who delivers cross-cultural competency training everywhere in the province. And I believe they're involved with some of the provincial immigration programs with that. And I think the province is starting a new project as well. Not quite sure of all the details on that, but there's some good work to come, I think, and I hope.
I'm just going to add that I do think that we've come a long way. Employers are really interested in skills, talent. Can you do the job? I think that's the key question. And can you show me? This is where everybody's going, especially small and medium enterprises and businesses that are focused on growth and scaling quickly. So I think they're really looking at skills. They're also looking at diversity, because I think that's where everybody's going. So that's what I see.
Great. And Mike, final quick thoughts.
Just to say that desperation is outweighing bias. So somebody who might be reluctant to hire an immigrant, if they're desperate because they need to hire people, will be prepared to take a risk on somebody from a different culture, etc. And we'll find out that, hey, wasn't the end of the world.
And nothing succeeds like success. And then we'll see a positive circle of reinforcement on that front, let's hope. Well, I think it's been a superb discussion, folks. In the time available, I think we could go on a lot longer. I want to thank our panelists today, Alexandra, Sherry, Tony, and Mike. I want to remind everyone to visit the Harris Center website, mun.ca/Harris Center, to watch the recording of this session and to share it with those who would be interested who couldn't join us. And you can also look there to see future events. We have a great partnership with the Future Skills Center, who we partnered with on today's event. And we will be collaborating with them again on future sessions related to employment, skills development, and the future of work in Canada. Look out for those. If you don't already receive our newsletter, The Regional, you can sign up on our website. Next up for the Harris Center is our launch of Newfoundland and Labrador's Vital Signs on October 21, done in partnership with the Community Foundation, our report on the quality of life in our province. And thanks again to the team at the Harris Center for another superb job pulling this session together. And of course, thank all of you for viewing from across the province, the country, and the world. Really important topic. clearly one that links the local and the global. And we look forward to hearing from you, and we'll see you at our next session.